Here's a good example. So we can see every once in a while, if you're using two different anaSuperTrends, that they get out of sync. And so the goal for BlackBird, so BlackBird needed to know when these anaSuperTrends were in sync, basically both identifying a downtrend or both identifying an uptrend. And BlackBird needs to know when they're out of sync. Well, actually, no, more importantly, BlackBird needs to know when they are in sync. Yeah, so BlackBird needs to know those areas there. Something like that and like that. There. Okay, so this logic's going to be pretty quick, pretty easy. Just trying to remember, I'm trying to think of what was the best way to use the anaSuperTrend. Yeah, let me try the threshold solver here first. So there's two ways that we can get the trend of the anaSuperTrend. And so one way is with this threshold solver. Right, so I've got a threshold solver and I'm just plugging in the anaSuperTrend settings here. And I'll just use the default settings first. And so the plots, you can either use the stop dot or the stop line. Both of those plots are the same for the anaSuperTrend. Oh, and actually, sorry, with the threshold solver, I didn't want to use the plots. I wanted to use the trend, right? In the threshold solver, you can use this data series called trend, like so. And yeah, there we go. We'll use the threshold solver, and we'll set a displacement of 1, which we can see what it does is it shifts, right? It shifts the signals forward 1 bar. So what am I looking at right here? Right, so the red plot is still plotting on that bar. Even though price had broke it, it's still plotting on that bar. So without this displacement, if I set it back to 0, right, you can see we're getting basically a long trend, right? The BloodHound's racing stripe is giving us a long trend, even though the plot is still red. It's up here instead of the plot being down here, right? We can see the plot switches the next bar over. So I can use a displacement of 1 to make that adjustment. So now when the plot switches to blue, it lines up with BloodHound's output here. Right? So the plot is still blue over here, right? And then when the plot switches to red and it flips, then right, BloodHound's output is now lining up with that. Right, so okay, so a displacement of 1 there fixes all that. And let's give this a name here. Okay. So this is telling us the trend of the wider SuperTrend, like so. And now that I have one of them set up, right, the other anaSuperTrend, right, it just has different indicator settings, but detecting the trend of it, right, the threshold solver settings are all going to be the same for detecting the other anaSuperTrend that just has different indicator settings. So what I can do is I can take a shortcut. Instead of setting up a whole new solver, I can take the solver I've made here. So if I go to the solver tab, click copy, like so. I'll just change the name. So this is going to be the trend of the inner anaSuperTrend. Then all I have to do is open up the indicator and make the indicator adjustments like so. And you know, as far as turning off the displacement and sounds and everything, yeah, practically it's not necessary. But I kind of do like to have the indicators in BloodHound match the settings that I have on the chart here. So if you remember on the chart, I turned off the show arrows, so I'm going to turn that also off inside of BloodHound. Not that it was necessary, but I just like consistency. Being consistent when you're putting together systems usually ends up being the best methodology, you know, for building something. So, because it's usually inconsistency is where you usually make mistakes. All right, so let's take a look here. Okay, so now we're looking at the threshold solver, right, for the inner anaSuperTrend. And if we look on the chart, right, here's the inner anaSuperTrend. There's the plots, right? So the red and green racing stripes is lining up now with the inner anaSuperTrend. Okay. So that's done. Now, to know when they line up, we just simply use an AND node. There. All right. And it matches my little rectangular drawings perfectly. Great. And of course, anybody else in the room, you know, if you have questions for these workshops, again, you can always email your questions in ahead of time to our support here, right? And the benefits of emailing your question in ahead of time is you can send screenshots to help explain your question, right? Screenshots go a long way, very helpful. And so if you have questions for BlackBird for tomorrow, I would encourage you to email your questions in ahead of time, but you can always ask them live in the webinar as well. Okay, well, with that, gentlemen, I hope to see you guys tomorrow in the BlackBird workshop. You don't have to be a BlackBird owner to attend the workshop. So otherwise, if I don't see you tomorrow, have a good weekend. See you next week. Bye, guys.